Welcome everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to the Johnson Chama Center for the Study of Science and Innovations forum on hemp and cannabis. What's the difference? And this is our first venture into public awareness and education related to the whole hemp, cannabis, and marijuana industries. There's an awful lot of media attention and public discussion related to these products in the areas, and we thought we'd bring in some experts from the field to give us a little bit of a background on this. My name is Jerome Konechny, and I'm an executive in residence with the Johnson Chama School of Public Policy, and I was one of the co-authors of the 2017 Johnson Chama report on legalizing and regulating cannabis in Saskatchewan. My background is in innovation. I worked in the public and private sectors, and my personal experience in this field of cannabis was working with a company called Biooriginal Food and Science, and one of our products was hemp seed and hemp oil. So I was involved in the product development, the processing and regulatory side of that. So that's my personal experience in this space. Before we start on our discussion, I want to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 4 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. As a policy school that extends beyond the University of Regina to the University of Saskatchewan, I would also like to acknowledge the school's presence on Treaty 6 territory, and would like to welcome Peter Phillips, the CSIP director, and our colleague from Saskatoon, who is joining us via video conference. There is a Saskatoon group that's taking in the activities down here today. The Johnson Chama Center for Science and Innovation Policy looks at matters related to policy in science, innovation, and governance considerations. As part of its work, we have actively been engaged in research and discussion on the legalization of cannabis, and we are now involved as a collaborator in the Cannabis Research Initiative of Saskatchewan, also known as CRIS. And one of the three pillars in that area, in that center, is policy work. So part of our policy work is work like today, where we're involved in public discussions and engagement and public awareness. As the date for marijuana legalization of marijuana approaches, the hemp industry, with the release of our report last fall, has raised some concerns about what the policy framework will look like, how it might interact or impact their business, which is a flourishing sector in the agricultural industry in Saskatchewan. Hemp products have a variety of different applications in the marketplace, and we have one of our representatives from that industry on the panel today. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel. Larry Halbrook, seated to my immediate left, is as the past research officer, Chief Research Officer with Canamed Therapeutics and Aurora Cannabis, with extensive agricultural biotechnology experience in both government and industry settings. Dr. Holbrook's expertise focuses on cellular and basic molecular biology experimentation on crop plants. Over his 35-year career, he was involved in developing the first genetically transformed canola in Canada as part of Agriculture Canada's first genetic engineering section. He was also instrumental in the creation of is that correct?
Yeah. Don't say too much.
Okay. And he was also involved in the startup of several agricultural companies in Canada. So he's got a public-private sector expertise, which is an excellent opportunity for us to get a multiple perspective. And of course, his most recent role was with Cannabis. Gary Meyer, seated next to Larry, is the president of Hemp Production Services, Inc. He was born and raised in northeastern Saskatchewan. Gary received his Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from the University of Saskatchewan. He's been farming since 1975 with his brother. Gary's peak size covered some 17,000 acres, producing a variety of seed crops, specialty component crops, as well as a number of traditional crops. The farm started to grow hemp in 1998, and Gary started a small hemp breeding program in 2001. He started producing pedigree hemp seed in the year 2000 and has successfully produced hemp seed, all pedigree classes, including breeder seed, until 2012. The Meyer Brothers farm ceased operations in 2012 when Gary's brother retired, and Gary continues to farm about 2,200 acres on a custom basis. During his career, Gary has been active in a number of agricultural industry associations dedicated to improving the viability of agriculture on the Canadian prairies. He has served on many local boards as the past chair of the Canadian Canola Growers Association, the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers Association, and the Canada's Outstanding Young Farmers Alumni. He also joined Borgo Industries as the company's agronomy leader in February 2006. And our final panelist is Dale Rasullah. He is a provincial specialist in specialty crops with the Ministry of Agriculture. He is a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from the University of Saskatchewan and has worked for the provincial government as an extension agrologist, crops manager in the agricultural research branch, and as an integrated cropping specialist in Ag Knowledge Centre in Moose Jaw. Within his current role as a provincial specialist for specialty crops, Dale has been involved in various committees and boards overseeing the development of a variety of specialty crops, and has been involved in promoting Canadian crops to consumers in Southern Asia and the United Arab Emirates region. With that, I'd like to turn our discussion over to our first panelist, Dr. Larry Holbrook. Larry?
Great, thanks.
I'll make sure I give you the hand off the mic before I walk away with it.
Thanks, Jerome. Thanks a lot for the invitation to come. I am gonna, this is very simple, informal from my point of view, non-technical, I don't think it's technical. With my understanding from Jerome when he asked me about this, I'm trying to look at the idea of somewhat a little bit around the terminology of hemp and cannabis, what that's about. I'm just going to present to you very briefly what it looks like to have been a medical cannabis company in Saskatoon, and the methodology of growing and what the products are like, and a little bit of a segue into why that looks and feels different from growing in the field. Terminology, really simply, those of us that always knew the term marijuana, the last few years we all call it cannabis. The botanical term is cannabis sativa. Those of us in the medical business now, no one uses the term cannabis that I'm aware of, we just say cannabis. And then somewhat on the side, we refer to hemp as that same plant growing outdoors for the fiber and seed part. So a lot of us just simply differentiate cannabis as medical. So this isn't, this isn't a written rule or whatever, and hemp as the field grown industrial hemp. And Gary may have some other views on how to look at that. There's a lot of genetics going on. There's cannabis debates about are there 2 or 3 species. Most of us think it's just cannabis sativa. Some people say there's an indica species. That's an ongoing thing. We're doing a lot of genomics work, and that evidence is getting down to more of a genetic basis to understand that. For those who might not know what that title means, at one level, yeah, it means we took the cannabis plant to market as a medicine, pot, but in another sense, we were bought out very recently, so we're in transition. So Aurora, a large company from Alberta, bought the Saskatchewan company CanMed, and so it's another way of saying maybe we've gone to pot in a different kind of way. If you go, so I'm going to give you a little bit of just the background about how you get the medicine and what the deal is in Canada to get medical marijuana, to have a permit or a license to use it, and a little bit of what the companies go through to produce it and how they produce it. If you go through all the Health Canada information, there's lots of online sites. If you wanted to be a patient or you wanted to be a grower, you go through a lot of paperwork. For a company like CanMed, the basics synopsis, I would say, of what you're doing for medicine for people is just in this simple phrase that I've taken out of Health Canada documents. Good production practices. It's a certain level of criteria you have to meet for proper control of growth. To help provide individuals with access to quality control or QA, quality assured quality control materials that you produce. Cannabis for medical purposes. So that's the essence of what a medical cannabis company wants to do. Now, Jerome had asked me earlier about a little bit of information. This is a little busy, but again, this is a Health Canada document. If you went online to get a permit as a patient, this is the sort of thing you want to go through. Just a couple things I want to point out to you. You have to go to a healthcare practitioner. They fill out a form. Now, you can go online, and all the licensed producers like ourselves, Cannabis Therapeutics, we have customer services. There's a lot of other ways to get help if you want help filling out these forms if you were a patient. And a lot of our older patients, we find this is very helpful. They phone in and people will talk them through the process. But you have to go to, as it says here, medical practitioners and nurse practitioners across Canada can sign off these medical documents for you. I want to point out, I've underlined here this phrase, healthcare practitioner must have the applicant for the medical document under their professional treatment. This is one of those things that is not enforced. Not hearing me. This is one of those things that are not well enforced. Think about it. You can go to Vancouver, you can go to Toronto, you can go to a dispensary. They'll tell you there's a little store around a little doorway around the corner you can go to. Somebody will fill out that form for you. So you can see that phrase. You're obviously not being looked after medically by that person. So there's a lot of slackness in how you get permits. So a lot of people, you might call it recreational, or Health Canada calls it adult usage now, not recreational. You can get these permits to have the rights to own or have medical marijuana or recreational fairly simply without really knowing your doctor. It's as simple as that. And there are many doctors in Canada that will not sign off on these documents at this point in time. The only other thing I put in red here is just a reminder that you can choose then, once you get this medical permit, you can choose which licensed producer in Canada to go to for their product to be shipped to you or sent to you. Or, secondly, at the bottom, you can produce your own, up to 4 plants. Mature plants each, at home. Or you can designate someone to grow those for you. So those are the ways that you could have medical marijuana in Canada currently. So over the last 6 or 7 years, where Cannabis Therapeutics in Saskatoon has been selling medical marijuana across Canada, up to about 40,000 patients over those years, we get feedback on what are they taking it for. And on those medical applications I just mentioned to you, doctors or health practitioners have filled out about 200 different kinds of conditions. I mean, everything I say somewhat from stub-toe to whatever. A lot of people get it for anxiety. But if you boil down those 200 conditions, most of our patients, you can boil it down to these disorders that are the primary uses in Canada, why people are taking medical marijuana for actual medical reasons. And I put in red here, about 70% of our patients, and again, many of them are more elderly, they're taking it for some form of pain. So pain is the key here to medical marijuana usage in Canada. Arthritis, chronic pain, fibromyalgia, those are the common ones. Those are the physical pains. Another big area, more emotional pain, is Ptsd. A lot of our military services and people that have traumatic events in life take medical marijuana, and usually higher THC materials for PTSD. In green I put epilepsy. The closest we are at, there are no pharmaceutical grade cannabis medicines that are considered pharmaceutical or have what's called a DIN number, so they are not registered as drugs. But epilepsy is the closest. There's a company from Britain, GW Pharma, that has done many years of clinical studies, mostly with younger kids, pediatric patients, for epilepsy, and FDA may approve the first cannabis drug this summer in the United States. So it's the first real upping of the ante for the legitimacy of cannabis as a drug. So again, pain is one of the biggest issues for our patients in Canada. So a company like Cannabis in Saskatchewan, their mission really from the get-go was all about safety and production. And this is why I'm going to start to contrast a little bit about field-grown cannabis as hemp versus our medical stuff grown in chambers or greenhouses. So patient safety, number one concern. One of the reasons behind we say that is we don't want to use pesticides or anything in our production. We have high-level quality control, quality assurance personnel on site that make sure we go through a lot of paperwork, a lot of standard operating procedures, and good safety issues so that the product goes out. There's a whole bunch of analytical measures that are done, microbials and heavy metals, all sorts of things are measured and accounted for and have to meet certain specification before it can go out to patients. And Cannabis in Saskatoon went a little higher step than good production practices. We went to good manufacturing practice, which is more pharmaceutical-like production. of a medicine for humans. So what it looks like in our hands is indoor growth chambers in Saskatoon, artificial lighting. Each chamber is highly controlled with HVAC systems for humidity and temperature control. No pesticides used. Our people, not a lot of other licensed producers across Canada, but we always have the habit of people showered in the morning, wore clean hospital scrubs, masks, and so on. So that helped us prevent any insects or any need to use pesticides. So that was very helpful for us. So that was our production system in Saskatoon. A little aside, some of the terminology here. So my understanding is there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there by where hemp, both as the fiber, it was a crop in North America 1800s, well earlier because George Washington grew it and so on. It was a major crop, and then there was medical use. The tinctures of cannabis and opiates were major medicine from about the 1840s to the 1920s, 30s. It was one of the major medicines we had in North America. And then, so the medical stuff in the States was called Indian hemp or Cannabis India. It wasn't referred to as marijuana. Now my understanding, it could be another conspiracy theory, I'm not exactly sure, but post-1913 Mexican Revolution, a lot of Mexican immigrants were coming into the Southwest. They did smoke marijuana, and so a derogatory term coming out of Washington by a fairly white-based, racist sort of political regime started to call it marijuana as a derogatory term. So again, this day and age, we call it cannabis. We don't refer to marijuana anymore. And another part of that bigotry thing and started the whole shutting down cannabis, both as the hemp plant and medicine, was the musicians and the blacks in the South using it. And so there's this whole, and this Anslinger guy was the FDA in the 1930s created this Marijuana Tax Act, which is basically calling it a controlled substance, Schedule I, and basically preventing its use as medicine anymore. So we had 100 or more years of using it as a classic medicine, widely used, mostly for pain relief, for example, and then we prevented it. And so in the 1930s, Hollywood puts out Reefer Madness as a way to try to scare people from using it, of course. I find it kind of strange. If I were a teenager, I'm not sure weird orgies, wild parties, unleashed passions would scare me, but it was supposed to scare you for some reason. So there's a lot of kind of theories about Randolph Hearst, DuPont developing synthetic fibers to get rid of hemp as a fiber product. And Gary might know a lot more about that. A little bit of biology. The chemistry of this, the medic part of it, is not in the plant at all in one sense. If you go through it, it's in female only, a little botany. It's a dioecious plant. You have male and female plants. It's only the female you want. There are these flower buds, the white pistils showing up here. If you come down to the bottom right there, you'll see these trichomes, they're called. So these are little extension cells, a little column of cells, and on top of that is a little glandular device. So the chemical, the medical stuff you want is in these little cavities on the surface of these capitate trichomes, they're called. And there's this small group of cells shown there and artificially colored in red. There's just about 30 cells that make all the cannabinoids, the THC, this cannabidiol, and all the multiple other cannabinoids, and some terpenes, the stuff that gives the aromas that people relate to in the recreation market especially, what the aromas are, different descriptions, bubble gum and so on. Skunk, those all come from that. So it's on the surface, so it's easy to extract actually if you want to chemically extract that. It's not inside the leaves or the cells of the plant. It's fairly easily extractable in organic solvents. So again, to just kind of compare and contrast industrial hemp in the field, this is what medical stuff looks like in a chamber with all the kind of biological controls and abiological controls. Lots of light, temperature and humidity controls, and again, people showered in and all clean and everything. So that's a nice mature crop of female plants that would be harvested. So a room like that, 1,000 plants harvested weekly. And that's another idea, we harvest weekly as opposed to an annual crop in the field. A little bit of reason behind why people might think there's money to be made here. I just mentioned most of our patients, up to 70% in Canada, are using it for pain of some sort. This is a little quote from a Nature article recently, some stats across the state, the United States, from a couple of years ago. Chronic pain, again, this big issue of disability in North America. walks of life. A lot of you are fairly young. As you get older, you'll discover pain becomes one of your parts of your age. There's a number, 630 billion a year just in pain relief. Now, at this point in time, we're talking opiates, and of course now we're into an opiate crisis, and we're trying to cut back on the opiate uses. And in fact, cannabinoids are looking like they could replace, with more safe conditions, a lot of the opiate use for pain relief. But I use that 630 billion just as an idea of where some of the more business investor side might say, oh, there's money to be made here. And I just want to bring that up as a number, even if we are overproducing it. Then for my own interest, there's a lot of stuff to do yet, I think. We've heard about THC, cannabidiol. Most people should have come across these things as the two major cannabinoids used for the medical purposes. But, as it's pointed out here, there's 100 or more cannabinoids, similar chemicals, in the plant itself. There are probably at least a half a dozen others that should be looked at and can be looked at. There's enticing suggestions they might have very specific medical uses for medicine. And this was a quote from a cancer researcher that suggests if you get down to more specific kinds of medical treatments, not just pain generally, but things like specific cancer treatment. So there's a lot of research to be done, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That's my own personal interest. For those who don't know, one qualifier here, I want to show you the top. We talked about female plants, the bud, the flower buds of that with those trichomes covering it. This is kind of a dried bud there that you would get like at a dispensary if you weren't shopping for it yourself. The plant makes all of those cannabinoid chemicals in those little resonance balls. They make them as acids, so tetrahydrocannabinolic acid. That's the A part there at the top. The reason we smoke it in the past, the active principle in our body that gives us the high and has the effect on us, on our nerve cells, on receptors that are on our cells, cannabinoid receptors, is that it has to be, that acid group, it's called a carboxyl group, has to be cleaved off. That happens by heating. And so the tradition of getting high on marijuana is because you smoked it and you heated it. So you have to remember the plant makes it as an acid. In fact, in terms of research, one thing we don't know is what does THCA itself can do medically. There's a whole area of work to do there yet, because we've only treated it as the stuff that's been smoked in the past. So, tradition, smoke, herbal cannabis, joints, pipes. Vaporization, probably the last 10 years, a lot of people have gone from burning joints to vaping, so that you just sort of volatilize off the chemical components, the cannabinoids, without the combustible material. So it's a healthier way. So a lot of people are going, as many people may know, to some form of vaporization. Our older patients don't like it at all, and so what we do is extract those chemicals from those trichomes, solubilize them, and Cannabis Therapeutics itself used olive oil, as I pointed out down here in red. We use olive oil as the soluble oil for it to be taken orally. And so a lot of people like to take it orally. It's a little slower to react, but it lasts a bit longer. So you can have tinctures, you can have edible products, you can use that oil directly, you can use it in cooking. You can use other kinds of creams and so on, other more penetrating, skin penetrating creams you can use, and so you can have topicals. So the whole area has gone, our market went from strictly herbal product for smoking or vaporizing about 4 years ago to the last, more recently, we were probably 60 to 70% of people take oils now. They don't smoke it at all. So cannabis product looked like this, different oils. So we never used the street name. So a lot of the rest of the world still uses the Girl Guide cookies or AK-47 or Purple Kush, all those kinds of street terms that are out there from the rec background. Cannabis never did that. We use a chemical composition number, so 120, 1010, 18. The first number is the amount of THC per mil. The second number is the amount of cannabidiol. So this 120 cannabidiol product is used for epilepsy in particular. A lot of people take it for pain relief in the morning because they don't have a psychoactive effect from CBD. And then a lot of people take 18-0 high THC at night for sleep. One of the things when you're suffering pain in your lifetime, one of the few things you want to try to achieve is a good sleep for the night. And a lot of our patients take THC at night and cannabidiol in the morning. And so we provide a product that's a bit of both, 10-10. So that's 60 mils of olive oil-based cannabinoid materials that we sell, and as of today, actually, that same oil now is put into capsules with a specific dosage. The doctors, the medical profession likes that because now you know how many capsules you can take during the day for a very specific dosage. So the medical facility is starting to accept it a little bit more that way because they can understand dosage. One last little pitch here that Jerome already mentioned. I think Saskatchewan is really quite a leader in the whole cannabis business because Cannabis itself has been around for actually about 16 years. And so we were a leader here with production of medical marijuana. And we are forging ahead. This is another quote from the Nature article very recently. A lot of recreational sales are in the States. And yet here's Israel and Canada really forging ahead as kind of internationally known for developing the medicines, the oils, different methodologies of delivery, and looking at international markets. And I do want to bring up, as Jerome mentioned, in Saskatchewan, we've got medical doctors, we've got molecular pharmacologists, we've got clinicians doing epilepsy studies, and others. We've got the vet school, very interesting in looking at cannabinoid medicines. I discovered up there recently there's such a thing as epileptic chickens that maybe CBD could work on. I didn't know that. I've heard a suggestion of a sow being given high CBD so that she feeds through milk to her piglets to be anti-anxiety, so on. So with that center up there of all that kind of work from the molecular, the plant breeding, the hemp breeding, the clinical studies, and basic cancer research and all those other things. So we're creating this hub, CRISP, the research initiative, and I think there's a lot of potential for Saskatchewan to become recognized as a really world center, perhaps, of cannabis research. But it would have to bring in much better genetics, which I think Gary's been doing with this hemp. The cannabis side of medical marijuana is just a dog's breakfast of genetics. People like myself have done crosses to create different lines, but there's a lot of genetics to be learned yet. There's a new genomics map coming out this summer I'm part of. We'll have a much more well-defined total genomic map, and then we can do real marker-assisted breeding. So in the end, my little segue into hemp. I see hemp personally, in my simplistic way, as the field-grown fiber seed for oil and protein. You need the male and female plants. Our medical cannabis role in the indoor growing is female only. We can harvest weekly as opposed to one crop annually. And I have one little pet peeve because our patients are quite confused out there with this terminology of hemp oil. To me, having worked with a lot of oil seeds like safflower and so on, I think of hemp oil as the seed oil from hemp. A lot of our patients think hemp oil is this medical stuff with CBD in it and so on. So those are two different things in my mind. So that's confused some of our patients about what hemp oil is. You know, if they go and get a cream from a cosmetic agency, it's called hemp oil. Well, it doesn't have CBD in it, because it's not supposed to. So that's all I had to say. So that's just, I wanted to show you just generally what the medical marijuana kind of looks like in growing, quality assurance and so on, and patient safety, again, is the take-home message there. A lot of research left to do because there's many, many more cannabinoids to work with, and we're developing real good research initiatives, including right through the clinical studies in Saskatoon in particular. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Larry. I find that the more I know about this product, the less I know about this product, and it's always great to expand one's knowledge base. I just thought I'd give you a bit of a geography lesson here this morning. I got up at 5 o'clock and I started off that blue dot represented by that arrow just south of Nipawin, Saskatchewan, and I worked my way down the road that they call Highway 35, and got here just before lunch, or right at lunchtime, so I'm glad to be here. So I'm going to start you off with a couple of did you knows. And we, as a company, have really strived to stay under the radar for most of our 15 plus years that we've been in existence. But under the radar, we have been successful at becoming one of the world's largest privately held plant breeding companies in the world of industrial hemp seed. And it's started right here in Saskatchewan, and today it represents about 40 to 45% of the permanent acres that were planted in Canada last year, and we have our genetics being produced in the Australian marketplace as well as the United States. And pretty proud of the little fact that we've done all this without one single cent of public dollars coming in to support us in that realm. So pretty proud of that. Our breeding objectives historically been always higher yields. When I first started playing with industrial hemp seed in 1998, it took me about 10 feet to the pass of a green John Deere combine to realize that this crop was not going to ever work in Saskatchewan if we couldn't farm this crop with the existing equipment that we had on the farm. So we started playing around with genetics, started about 2001, and there's a long story how we got involved in the hemp breeding business in 2001. But we needed higher yields, we needed shorter plants, we needed shorter maturities because after all we're north of the 49th parallel, and some years we have to decide whether our last frost-free day in the spring and the first frost-free day in the fall may well be in the middle of July someplace. So we have a very short growing season at times, so we have to be mindful of that. We have spent my entire career in the genetics business working against the THC side of the business because Health Canada has dictated and decreed that we must be less than 0.3% THC in all of our field-grown genetics. And it didn't take the marijuana business very long to figure out that they didn't want to be anywhere close to us. There was the first couple of years we had some people entering the fields and making off with the stuff and trying to do well or get high or whatever they're going to try and do with it. But one of the best ways to curtail a market is to have a bunch of unhappy customers, and that market quickly dried up as people realized that what we were doing in the field really wasn't going to be of much value to what they had in mind. One of the things, or side benefits that you get when you're looking for low THC is you inadvertently start bumping the other cannabinoids in the profile. And we have been successful without even trying to bump our various cannabinoid contents in our varieties to the point that we're almost 2x what would be represented in most of the other genetics that are available on the approved list from Health Canada at this point in time. Keep in mind that 3 years ago, none of us in this hemp breeding business knew how to spell cannabinoid. Today, we're very much tuned into it, and even though it's technically illegal for us to look at it or look for it, we do know what's in our systems now, and there are labs out there who are actually doing work and will do work for us to help us analyze what we have in the field. We're looking for harvestability. We did focus in our early part of our careers at trying to focus primarily on grain for the human food consumption. Fiber was an industry that I've actually had 5 different experiences with in my farming career of ag fibers. They all tend to not do well because there's just a lot of issues around stability, supply, quality, that type of thing that occurs with ag fibers that really is not going to have much of a chance in my career, my lifespan, to get up and running at this point in time. And then we needed some weed control options out there. So we spent a fair bit of time developing weed control options, both on the herbicide and the cultural side of that business. And the seed size. We have to keep in mind that we're involved in the food business primarily, first and foremost, and seed size, seed quality, flavor profiles are pretty important to us on that seed. Here's another did you know. Cannabis in Saskatchewan is home to undoubtedly the world's largest agronomic research company when it comes to industrial hemp seed. And we have spent many bucks, dollars out of our pockets understanding crop nutrition, crop nutrient uptake in various forms or phases of its life cycle. Looking at various weed control management options, we support very heavily the organic component of our business because the market is or has been willing to pay a bit of a premium for that and has attracted some folks into that productive protocol. Disease management options are pretty important because you really have nothing that's available to you in terms of going to the local crop supply store and picking up a product that to go out there and apply to that crop to slow down the sclerotinia stem rots or the infections in the head, all these sorts of things that will impact your food quality as you go to your local Costco or co-op to see what's in that bag. Grain harvest management, critical. We can easily get it off the field with any colored painted combine that's on the market today, but what you do to that crop after it comes out of the field is absolutely critical to success and the safety of the whole food supply chain. And I would like to suggest that we're, as a company, have got a lot more knowledge in that. We've forgotten more about that part of the business than most of the companies in the marketplace today will ever know, and how to support and stabilize that crop when it's in storage. And here's another did you know. Saskatchewan is also home to one of the world's largest privately held food processing businesses and production services, which I head up as well. And there's a variety of products that we produce at this point in time, primarily for the ingredient business. There's a lot of companies out there use our products in their inclusion items in their various recipes. And you'll notice here, Larry, that we refer to everything in there as hemp seed. And that has been a B&R bond as well, as hemp oil is not hemp oil. We are producing oil out of the hemp seed, which is completely different than what is being produced on the outside of that plant. And I just love this little slide here. When it comes to, when you're in the food business or in any kind of a business where you're marketing to the consumer, you have to differentiate your marketplace. And I think we've been reasonably successful at doing that, and this little guy's caught on to that in spades. He's got the same product, it's coming out of the same jug, but he changes the name on it, he's able to extract a bit of a premium in the marketplace. And unfortunately, that is the case that occurs in the food business as well. There's a lot of labels out there that probably are at best misleading. And I can never let a presentation go by without encouraging people to understand the value of the hemp seed in terms of the human diet. It's, I like to phrase it as probably the closest thing you're going to find to the perfect food, which people determine to be fish in terms of the amino acid, fatty acid profiles that are available in fish protein and fish oils. Except this one here happens to have roots on the bottom of it, and we can grow it here in Western Canada in huge volumes. Okay, I'm going to just start off with a couple of issues that I see that are being not addressed in the current realm of regulations being discussed, I guess, by our federal government. We have grown up in the hemp seed business being strictly regulated in terms of our seed sources and how those genetics are maintained and replicated. And if we do it all right, we are issued a little pink or a peach or whatever you want to call that color of paper. Essentially, it's a crop certificate that tells the world that we have done everything right in the field, and we are now eligible for further certification and testing processes on that. And one of the questions I've asked repeatedly from anybody who is in the political arena or even assistants to the politicians is, will that same regulation still be in place after the new Cannabis Act is in place for all cannabis species? I get at best a blank look. Nobody knows. Most people don't even know the Canadian Seed Growers Association exists. When we're doing our variety trials and seed replications and marketings in the United States or Australia, we only deal with states that will accept the American Association of Seed Certifying Agencies requirements for planting seed. Because that typically or historically has been our only way to protect our intellectual property, is by having farmers come back to you every year to ensure that they get new genetics. From a processing side of the business, if I don't have predictability coming into my processing plant of a variety and how it's going to perform, I need to know the amino acid profiles, I need to know the fatty acid profiles, I need to know the seed size, purities, all that stuff needs to be known before it goes into my processing plant. And if a farmer is saving his own seed, I haven't got a freaking clue. Sorry, pardon my French. We need to have stability of the seed source. And I would suggest that might be the same in the medical business as well, and adult use business. The blue tag is what recognized around the globe as being a symbol of genetic purity, purity of the sample, and when you plant in the ground, it's going to germinate to the level specified on that tag. And I can't emphasize enough that as we move forward in the whole cannabis realm, that we need to know the source of our genetics and it be clearly identified to the person buying those genetics. If we don't know the source of our genetics, there's no way that we as a breeder can protect ourselves in the marketplace. We are very fortunate in Canada that one of the last things that Stephen Harper did in his reign as Prime Minister is he made Canada a signatory to the UPOV 91. UPOV 91 is a treaty on international protection of varieties or plant genetics, and now breeders in Canada actually have rights where they can protect their offspring, their progeny. We're now the same as a rancher who can build a fence around his cow herd and protect the calves from the coyotes or the pirates or whoever else might be out there. We have control over how that product will be utilized in that marketplace. And this is just an example of some of the restrictions you have to go through if you're going to be a seed replicator in the field. And it's a couple of points up there that are, I'm not sure if you'll be able to point out here. Oh, it does work. But there is isolation distances from various forms of hemp seed in the field. One of the biggest enemies of the medical cannabis crowd, recreation crowd, is my pollen. I will decimate his crop. Pollen is a contaminant to his business. I can tolerate some of his pollen, but thankfully he doesn't produce pollen because he's using all females. He's very hard on the male population of the cannabis species. And this is just some things that we need to know, and I would hope that everybody in the business of medical, recreation, adult use would comply with the attempt to keep what they're producing as being pure and stable in that environment, and that the government recognizes the value that this would bring to the marketplace. So that is one of my big concerns when it comes to the new regulations, that I don't think that they understand that, they don't get it, and they haven't, or so far they don't seem to be very willing to talk about it. So a brief lesson on what is industrial hemp, and this is a slide that I developed almost 20 years ago, because really people didn't know the difference between cannabis hemp and cannabis marijuana, but it's the beauty of all the cannabis species. It's the only plant found on the planet that in the non-seed portion of the plant, it contains cannabinoids, a variety of cannabinoids. And in the case of industrial hemp seed, we need to be less than 0.3% of the tetrahydrocannabinoid. Then there's the other stuff, the stuff that Larry works with. And they also contain a variety of cannabinoids, but they are trying to push that THC, the tetrahydrocannabinoid, to levels far beyond where the industrial hemp world can be. And the fact that the industrial hemp cannabinoid profile seems to be very similar from what I've been told, and I don't profess myself to be an expert in this field of chemistry whatsoever at this point in time, but it allows the farmers to consider a third harvest option, potentially, if the regulations will allow it. We now look at the fiber side of the game, we can now look at the seed side of the game for human food, plus we have actually developed some technologies where we can capture the flower parts off the back of whatever color combine you want to have, concentrate them in the field, and now haul highly concentrated raw material, tech material, off the field. So it's going to be an interesting opportunity for growers if they're allowed to fully participate in that, and I am not sure that the new regulation will allow growers to fully participate in that space. There, of course, will be a lot of protocol required to be put in place. On the food side, we know you're producing a food crop. There's really very little value added or processing to that hemp seed after it comes off the field. So the farmer's responsible for food integrity, food safety, and the same will occur, or will be expected of him when it comes to the cannabinoids, because our objective in this game is to have repeat customers. If we keep killing them off with bad food or bad cannabinoids, it's not going to work very well. So we spent the last 20 years trying to clearly draw a line between the two. Well, now this new understanding of the cannabinoid is making that line a little bit fuzzy, and I think there might be some debates, and hopefully not heated debates, about who gets to play in that space on the cannabinoids other than the tetrahydrocannabinoid going forward. And this is my last beef I'm going to talk about today. Is in 1988, under the rule of Brian Mulroney, the Parliament of Canada passed the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. And buried in that act was a lot of things, including definitions for biotechnology and what would be deemed to be regulated within that act. And that piece of legislation is rapidly coming back to bite Canada in the backside hard. And I would hope that somebody's going to wake up to the problems encased in this Environmental Protection Act, and we're counting heavily on the support of our friends in the adult use business to come along and help us support that. So we have a definition here that you simply pull out of the Act. It's the application of science and engineering in the direct or indirect use of living organisms or products of living organisms for their natural or modified forms. So that is their definition of what biotechnology is in the Act. So there's products in that Act that are subject to regulation. And one of them has gotten a lot of press and a lot of venom attracted to it by various sectors out there who are, I don't want to pull a name off, but I'll pirate one of John Gormley's favorite terms, cave people, citizens against virtually everything. This GMOs, and I think Larry at lunchtime mentioned he had spent a fair bit of his early career working in the whole area of canola modification. This definition he may well have written. It's organisms which are obtained by in vitro alteration of the genetic material, including but not restricted to recombinant DNA, nuclear and organelle transplantation, and genetic manipulation of viruses. And if I'm stumbling over that, I have to appreciate that I got my degree in 1976 before this word was invented. Okay, and now we have plants with novel traits. This is the one that's a real worry. It's so worrisome to us in our breeding company. And our breeding company not only has industrial hemp seed in it, we have lentils in there, we've got quinoa in there, we've got oats, on it goes. Faba beans. A plant with a novel trait, by definition, in that Act, is a plant that contains a trait that is both new to the Canadian environment and has the potential to affect the specific use or safety of the plant with respect to the environment and human health. These traits can be introduced by using biotechnology, mutagenesis, conventional breeding techniques, which is old school breeding, or have some potential to impact weediness, gene flow, plant pest potential, or non-target organisms or biodiversity. So when you look at that, with a simple act of Parliament, we should be able to eliminate wild oats. They weren't here when our forefathers come here. They just happened to show up, and they've actually caused us significant problems. But the problems that this piece of legislation has created. Crop Development Center here at the University of Saskatchewan, Saskatoon campus. Very innovative group. Done a lot of great work. Lentils, peas, chickpeas, numerous beans, including faba beans. But there's one bean that they run past one bureaucrat on one particularly bad day in that bureaucrat's life. The fleur de mayo bean. How many people have heard of it? Anybody who travels to Mexico will eat, undoubtedly will be consuming fleur de mayo beans. They're in every Mexican dish that involves a bean. They're not quite a pink bean, they're not quite a white bean, they are a bit of a mottled color bean. And the University of Saskatchewan identified a market in Mexico to sell these beans to that would be allowed to be produced by Canadian producers. Well, somebody within the realm of the bureaucracy in Ottawa decided that the fleur de mayo bean might be toxic to Canadians, even though they have spent many, many holidays consuming them in Mexico. And they said, we have to prove to us it's not damaging and not problematic for the Canadian consumer or the environment. And you have to show us at your expense that it's not a plant with a novel trait. There's really no way. Go back to the Middle Ages. If you're accused of being a witch, how do you prove you're not a witch? You can't, because you're burned at the stake before you have a chance to confess. And that's what happened with the fleur de mayo bean. The market opportunity lost. And it's interesting that this package of fleur de mayo beans is available for sale in Canada, imported from any place, and it will not be grown by a Canadian grower, farmer. So you look at the fleur de mayo bean, and you look at the things that we're now talking about in industrial hemp seed on the cannabinoid side. Some of the fatty acid profiles we're looking at playing in industrial hemp seed. You look at what that potential impact of this regulation could do to the adult use business. Everything that they've got could be a novel trait. A very simple stroke of the pen by some bureaucrat could kill the hemp industry and the adult use cannabis business as well. by simply, especially when you look at the logic behind the bean. These beans aren't safe. My other comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. And our last speaker is from the Ministry of Agriculture, Dale Rasullah. So Dale is going to give us the provincial perspective on specialty crop and the new emerging area of cannabis for recreational or adult purposes. Dale?
And thanks to Larry and Gary for those presentations. I think they really did a great deal of work in preparing to present to you a lot of the information about cannabis in Saskatchewan and Canada. And I don't really have a presentation for you because I thought I didn't want to just bring so much information to you that this whole meeting might just go up in smoke, as they say. Anyhow, I just thought I'd come and talk to you a little bit today about the ministry's perspective and where I see the ministry going in terms of seeing cannabis develop in Saskatchewan. And I think for a great part of Gary's presentation, he isolated on a lot of areas that I think the ministry is really concerned with and that we will likely be spending more time on in the coming times. For the most part, Health Canada has been the major body that's been governing development of cannabis in Canada. And it appears to us as though they want to kind of maintain that level of authority over development of cannabis in Canada. But nevertheless, some aspects of development will be divvied out to the provinces. And I guess in terms of how the province has dealt with other crops in the past, some of the things that I see the ministry doing in the future to help develop cannabis industry will be to look at and identify gaps and needs that might be needed in the industry that perhaps industry players themselves might not have the time or the availability to deal with. So I think, as in with other crops that we deal with, we'd probably be looking at things like that. And one of the things that might be included in that would be to help out in areas that might be barriers to the marketplace. Right now there are a lot of things going on in the U.S. that actually are a bit of a barrier for development of cannabis in that country, but at the same time, having said that, they are moving fairly rapidly. And a lot of the states, there's about 5 states right now, I think, Gary, is that right, that have legislation in place to allow them to grow hemp for the purposes of economic production, and are moving ahead with that. But in a lot of instances in the U.S., they basically have to apply for permits for testing, for scientific study. And there's some holdback as to why hemp won't move a little faster in development in the U.S. At the same time, they import a great deal of materials from Canada, and that's a good thing for us. Right now, the area of focus that a lot of people have is with the cannabinoids and the CBD in particular. And the benefits of that particular product, I think, are what really driving a lot of interest in cannabis right now. It appears as though some of the preliminary research and clinical trials would indicate that that particular product has an effect in reducing the effects of schizophrenia, epilepsy, Ptsd, and those kinds of affiliated things that affect people's minds. And so people are looking at it because preliminary results would also indicate that the effects are not having any, the use of CBD is not having any negative results in terms of usage, like a lot of the current pharmaceuticals are. Things that are currently in place for dealing with those issues create other problems like obesity and weight gain and headaches and that kind of thing, have a lot of factors affiliated with them, but preliminary indications are that CBD may not have that. So we want to be involved in terms of developing that avenue and helping to develop that area. So that would be one of the things that we would look at in terms of helping out in barriers to the market and market development. I guess from there we'd also be looking at production techniques, a lot of the things Gary talked about again, areas in breeding that might need some help in terms of perhaps pest management. We'd also look at aids to farming operations. There are different requirements that crops have out there that need to be dealt with because as a lot of people may not want to acknowledge, anytime you have a particular crop that's grown for too many years in a row, there's usually a buildup of some disease or insect pressure or weed pressure that associates with that, so you need to know how to deal with that. And you need to know how to deal with that in the safest manner as far as the environment goes. Most of the help that we provide from the ministry comes through various funds. Perhaps the main one would be the ADF fund, the Ag Development Fund, which has been increased this past year in terms of dollars available, and we are starting to see some applications from various researchers who are looking at various aspects of developing cannabis for the hemp industry. And I guess just with regard to the whole meeting today, you know, the differences between hemp and cannabis, marijuana cannabis, it really, I guess, I don't know if you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but it comes down to one particular thing, that's the THC. You know, the THC in regular cannabis is the stuff that gets you high, and the CBD, which is just one of many cannabinoids, is the stuff that actually brings you down. And they are the same plant, and you get two different reactions from the same plant. So hemp is regulated because it's got 0.3 maximum THC level allowable. Not anything over that, and it's not registered. It can't be registered. So already it has a bit of an advantage in that regard if people are worried about THC compounds. Not to take that anything away from the cannabis marijuana side, if that's a good enough term to use. There's no real good term to use for that. But THC also has some medicinal benefits as well. So we don't want to lose that, and the ministry will also be involved in that side of things as well. I guess some of the things that we also will look at, I'm sure down the road there's going to be a need for processing. One of the leading things that perhaps lead a lot of market development out there, and it's been evident, and I know we talked about the pulse industry today, is the health benefits of certain foods. The benefit of having resistant starches. Well, hemp has a lot of benefits to it as well, and that they've already been mentioned. The oil is very healthy oil. It's one of the most sought after ingredients in terms of making these protein smoothies that a lot of people want now in the health industry. And it basically, when you look at hemp in comparison, it's really a commodity with the ability to move into the pharmaceutical side of things because of the CBD content. What we want to do is eliminate the pseudoscience that's out there. A great deal of processing needs to be very pure and derive a very pure product, and that product needs to be administered in a way that is going to be beneficial and not have any side effects to the consumer. And that's what we want to see happen, because there's a great deal of pseudoscience that goes on out there that people are extracting what they call CBD, and it's very unpure and pretty much useless. So we want to avoid that sort of thing from happening. Extension, a great deal of extension is often required with this sort of thing, and the ministry would probably be involved in extending information to growers who are interested in growing hemp or the medical marijuana, as it were. A lot of detail has to be worked out there yet as to how the province is going to play a part in that. As I said earlier, Health Canada seems to want to maintain a great deal of control in that, and time will tell as to how things pan out in that area. I guess In addition to that, I guess what we do as well is work closely with a lot of the advocates for various industries. And right now, in the last couple of years, I've been working fairly closely with the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance group, which is a group that represents a wide range of people within the trade, from growers up to marketers and processors. They're all involved in that, and I've been working with them and putting on some of their conferences and putting together speakers who have come and talked about the hemp industry. So that's really mostly been my side of the things, is the hemp side. And in addition to that, Saskatchewan has the Hemp Trade Alliance people signed an agreement with a Saskatchewan group called Herb, Spice and Specialty Ag, who have taken on the assignment of representing hemp in Saskatchewan. So they do a great deal in that area, and one of the things that they're dealing with is the good agriculture collection practices, because as Gary had alluded to, you need to have good, safe storage for the product after it's been harvested, and store it safely in a manner that it doesn't deteriorate, because it's going to be packaged fairly quickly and put into the stores fairly quickly. So I guess our interest in hemp has also grown in the province in the last couple of years. It appears as though probably in the last 5 or 6 years, the level of interest among growers has just gone viral, so to speak, in Saskatchewan. And we are now the leading producers in terms of area seeded in Canada, and there doesn't seem to be any shortage of interest in that area. And I think that once the CBD thing becomes ironed out a bit, if it becomes ironed out a bit, and the province will work with the industry to try and see that happen, because it's a good thing for Saskatchewan. It's a good thing for Saskatchewan growers. Growing hemp adds another crop to the list of crops that we have in our rotations. So that reduces the buildup of pests and inoculum from disease and that sort of thing when you don't have that kind of thing. And it also reduces the need for some of the products that might be applied to control pests in the field. And this is why we want to see additional crops added to it. It will add to the economics of the province and the growers in particular. And so the ministry really has a strong desire to want to see this happen. And at the same time, though, we recognize that there are always going to be safety concerns with things, and we never overlook that at any time. And I don't believe the industry does either. So really, that's about all I had for you. I didn't bring a PowerPoint presentation. I didn't want to overkill the amount of things on there that you might have to look at and write down. And I'll end it there.
Thanks, Dale, for your perspective from the Ministry of Agriculture. One of the things that we were also hoping to get involved in the discussion is related to the whole business of policy. As the provincial government is starting to roll out its policy and implement it, there's a lot of complexity, I think, as people start to realize. If you read the report that Johnson Triama issued last fall, you begin to see that, and you appreciate it with some of the media coverage that has been ongoing since. So one of the things we're hoping to is to get some engagement in the discussions. What are those things? What are the threats to existing industries like the industrial hemp law? What is the impact on the medical marijuana, if any? How do all of these industries, how can we develop a policy framework where they can all thrive and coexist? Certainly in other areas, Larry was involved in canola development. Well, we had our share of challenges with mustard seed and canola seed, especially with the transgenic canola. How can we coexist in this world, in this community, in this sector? So it's important to have the dialogue and the discussions, and that's why we're so happy to have Dale here, where the provincial government can actually hear the perspectives of policymakers and researchers, as well as people who are involved in the industry itself. And when you look at the adult or recreational use cannabis, as the terminology, I think, is one of the first areas we need to work on and get some clarity around what are we actually calling each of these products and each of these sectors, and then try to develop consistent use or a standard use of that. But when you look at, you can see the specifications that both Larry talked about for his industry, the medical cannabis industry, and you look at the industrial hemp cannabis that Gary talked about, you see well-defined product specifications, related to the bioactives. With the emerging field of recreational marijuana, there isn't a definition, in terms of what are the product specifications. And if you talk to people who obtain cannabis illegally now in the illicit market, the amount of THC can vary from anywhere from 10% to over, I think I've heard stories of 30%. But when you buy the product, from an illicit source, you're not given a certificate of analysis that says this is what you're buying. There's no herbicides or pesticides or rogue chemicals in this product, which is, when you look at the objectives of the federal governments, there are 3 policy objectives that we have to keep in mind. And as a policy researchers and policymakers, we have to say, how are we going to implement policies that, number 1, reduce the illicit market, number 2, reduce youth consumption, and 3, protect public health and safety. So every policy we implement should be measured against those objectives. At least from our perspective at the Johnson-Shrema School of Policy, we think that's a framework for sound policy. So I'd like to take this opportunity then to thank our 3 speakers. They devoted a fair amount of time and travel, both Larry and Gary, for coming a long way, and their commitment to ensuring public education and awareness and helping support all of us in terms of developing a safe and viable industry in hemp, in medical cannabis, as well as the recreational adult use. I think it's going to take dialogue, it's going to take discussion, and the School of Public Policy is committed to facilitating that public discussion and public engagement. So I extend an invitation to anybody here who attended. If this wasn't a one-off session, we hope that if there's other issues and discussions related to policy-related matters that you would like to have discussed publicly and you'd like to learn more, we'd be happy to facilitate that. So please forward your information to the school. You can send it to the CSIP, care of Peter Phillips or Ann Ballantyne, and we'll we'll work to put together a panel of experts or whatever appropriate program. But we want to continue this dialogue because it's been one of the most fascinating and challenging policy projects I've ever worked on, and I think it's important we get this right. But more importantly, we're not going to get it perfect right off the bat. So what we need to be able to do is to have well-informed and good data collection, good metrics to determine where our policy framework is not meeting its original objectives, and we have to have the courage to modify and change those policies. And that's, I think, what the policy school, Johnson-Shrema, is promoting. Let's not be afraid to admit we're not wrong. I don't think we got alcohol right yet. And how long have we been consuming alcohol in this province legally? So I guess my point is it's an ongoing process, and it involves many different interest groups. So thank you for coming. And thanks, Saskatoon. Any comments from your side, Peter?
No, a few of our people have had to leave, but I'd like to thank your panelists on behalf of the Saskatoon audience. You've generated significant interest and attention, so thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.